Welcome to our Wellness Matters talk this evening. I'm so happy you decided to spend a bit of your evening with us. Our talk this evening is Finding My Way, an artist's journey exploring mental health through creativity, curiosity, and embracing the unknown. And I'm very excited, and I will introduce our facilitator very soon. I just wanted to share with you about a few upcoming events that we have before we start. My name is Nicole, by the way, Nicole Imgrand, and I'm the owner of Rivers Edge Counseling Center. This talk is part of a series. I see some familiar faces who've attended other talks, so you know we do these a couple of times a month, and we've been doing these for almost 11 years now. So we have a lot of previous talks and resources that you can still access on our website. And we have a few new ones that are still coming up this spring. In June, we have one called Expanding the Window of Tolerance, How to Respond Instead of React. In June, we have Unlocking ADHD, a deep dive into the unique challenges for women and girls. And in July, we have one called Sometimes Getting There Faster Means Slowing Down. So you're welcome to join us for any of those. We also have quite a number of group programs. We're just winding down the start of those programs for spring, but I wanted to let you know that the Compassionate Road to Building Self-Esteem with Sheila Ennen is still coming up. It starts on May 2nd, and there's a few spaces open in that group. And we are going to release our fall calendar in the next couple of weeks. And we have a lot of new groups again. I think we have about 12 or 13 programs that are going to be running starting in September. So you can see what those are very soon as well. And with that, I'm going to introduce our presenter, Erin Munson. Erin is an artist, filmmaker, cinematographer, and a student, currently completing a master's degree in psychotherapy and spirituality at St. Stephen's College and a practicum placement at Rivers Edge Counseling. Their work has taken them from their personal studio in St. Albert to war zones, high Arctic weather stations, and Erin, I had to read this twice when you sent it, reindeer nomad camps in Siberia, and the Arabian Desert. I've heard some great stories from you, but this just reminds me that I still have more stories to hear and questions to ask. Erin's projects tackle extreme human experiences, both far from and close to home, utilizing film, video, photography, and performance to create explorations of what it means to be human and the nature of consciousness. Erin's talk will take most of the hour, but we'll be able to stay for 5 or 10 minutes afterwards if there's questions. As it's a webinar format, of course, you don't have access to video or mute as participants, but the chat is open in the Q&A. So if you'd like to make comments as you go or post some questions, at the end, we'll take a look at them and Erin will have a bit of time to address them as well. In the meantime, if anything comes up technical or anything, I'll be here to support, but I'm just going to turn it over to you, Erin.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for coming, everyone. Here, I'm just going to share my screen and boom. Play. Okay, and hope everyone can see that. So tonight I'm going to kind of give a presentation. It's not so much like a psychoeducational kind of presentation, more about like kind of taking an opportunity to tell my story and hopefully through that kind of sharing some of the things that kind of have come my way and the things like through my experience that other people might find something like beneficial or insightful. And yeah, so I'll kind of go through an overview of like my life and mostly my career and the different art projects that I've done to kind of as part of this exploration of mental health. And I'll start at the beginning. So putting this presentation together is pretty fun. I like working with ChatGPT to create images. So I created like this image of a kid, a baby, like with the prompt was just to have like an open mind, and it generated this little picture that I think kind of reminds me of me as a kid. So, and just kind of thinking of that inner child that kind of carries throughout our lives. That's kind of part of like who we are and where we come from. So, kind of want to come back to this quote a few times, which is by David Graeber, which is the ultimate hidden truth of the world is that it is something that we create and could just as easily make differently. And I'll come back to that again and kind of keep this in mind as I could go through my presentation, just thinking of kind of the stories we tell, like individually and collectively, as something that is of our making and that could be different. So I'll start with a picture of me when I was quite young, and just as a sense to think of like in the beginning, like I think of each kind of baby photo as like the once upon a time photo. It's like the beginning of so much possibility as we enter the world. And our brains are like kind of like blank sponge, like sponges that absorb the world or taking in everything and that we first encounter, and everything is potentially significant, like because there hasn't been that like synaptic pruning that's kind of told us like what's important and not important. It's just this kind of raw experience, and and there's a lot of trust in the reality that we inherit from the people that are first we first encounter. Like that would be primarily our parents, but like other people in our lives. And for me, like when I kind of came into the world, it was an interesting place. Like the belief system that my parents had kind of painted this picture of kind of this like apocalyptic battle of good versus evil. And like when you're young, you just kind of take things as they come, and it's like, okay, this is what the world is. And I say this not to kind of like judge the belief system that I grew up in or any belief system or to blame anyone. It's more about just kind of understanding like the lived experience I had and how that shaped kind of my worldview and the fear that kind of came out of that framework, which would impact me like later in life. So while there was like much love and support, there is also this fear of this kind of the world that I perceived as this kind of spiritual reality that was out there. And that reality was that the world was kind of coming to an end, like at a like in the not too distant future. And even as a kid, like I didn't think like I would live to be an adult. I thought this was something that was like gonna happen, and like the faithful would go to heaven and then the rest would like kind of face Armageddon. And it was a strange, but like, again, like when you inherit a narrative, you just kind of take it at face value. And it's like, okay, this is the world. But it was a world that was feared, like full of quite a bit of fear for me. And like I spent a lot of nights like kind of afraid for my soul. And part of this narrative was also just the kind of within the good and evil kind of like narrative, like this idea of hell. And and as a child, like it was just such a hard thing to wrap your head around. And even as an adult, it's still like a hard thing to wrap my head around in terms of like why we would believe this. And as a kid, it's just there's a lot of fear of like this place that you might go to if like you're not good enough or if you don't pass this test. And I spent a lot of time like even like quite young just concerned with like these existential concerns of like what happens after death is like am I good enough? And on the flip side of that would be this idea of like heaven, which was equally confusing of this idea of like eternal life and going to this like place in the clouds. And like it was all very strange, but the world is a strange place. Like the universe is mysterious. So it's like if you kind of inherit a narrative, it's like sure, like why not? There's no reason not to believe these things. But and like they're not wasn't inherently bad. It was just that there was this fear that kind of stuck with me of this sense of like this is a test and like I need to pass the test. Um and on the other side of that, which like I think was the saving grace, was just the connection to nature and to creation. Like as like an important part of my life from early on. Like some of my earliest memories are just camping and being in the forest by our house and spending a lot of time in that and connecting kind of with that reality as well. And, and then there was, so I grew up in as a childhood and my throughout my childhood kind of believing that, and there was a point in my adolescence that I just began to question that narrative, and to a point where I kind of gave it up and lost my faith, walked away from kind of that way of viewing the world, and and at that point, it's a hard thing to do. Anyone that's kind of walked away from their faith or has lost their faith can, I imagine, can speak to this, which is you're walking away from a worldview, and so at that point, you're forced to ask yourself, okay, who am I? If I'm kind of taking this story that I took as truth and casting it aside, and what am I then kind of putting in place of that? And throughout my adolescence, it was a difficult time because it's like I don't really know who I am. I don't know what reality really is. I don't know what to believe. Like, what is my story if I've kind of rejected this other way of viewing the world? And it was a time that like I struggled with depression for quite a while, just kind of being in this kind of like this existential vacuum, I guess you could say of just not really knowing which way was up, and like the friction that was created from like walking away from that belief system, which my family still did. So there's that made it more difficult. And I think again, what kind of came to me was like just curiosity. So this is if I don't believe in this, okay, what is truth? What is the reality that I'm experiencing? What do I want to experience? What do I want my story to be? And so kind of turned to art kind of as a way, and I'll return to this kind of inner child that's kind of at the center of a lot of these images. And I found art as a way to really connect to that exploration of what it means to be human. Um, and there's which is a massive conversation that's been going on for human history, was these questions and these ways of exploring these questions through different mediums, and not just through like language, like through conversations, but through like visual conversations, through music, through um for me, one thing that I was really drawn to was film, like watching movies. I remember like I would always like hide underneath my bed at night under my covers with my little black and white TV that only had like three channels on it, and would just stay up late watching late night TV, and CBC would often put on just strange films that like they would never like put on during the day, but just some kind of Canadian cinema that was a bit more avant-garde or experimental, and was just kind of this little window into like this other conversation that was happening, and these explorations of being that these artists were having, and I was just kind of taken by that, and kind of felt this sense of like it's not necessarily I'm not needing to figure out truth per se, or needing like a concrete way of viewing the world, but just kind of engaging in the dialogue of exploring that and being curious about it, um, and kind of learning to explore uncomfortable spaces, of what it means to be. And that was also through like different visual arts, such as painting. And one of the first things I kind of got into was uh, like photography. I was really drawn to the idea of like capturing images of the world. And there's one kind of quote that came out of this movie called Notes on Blindness, which is about a man that like was slowly losing his sight and kind of kept a tape diary, like an audible diary of or audio diary of just what it was like to experience going blind. And there's one kind of line from that film that says cognition is beautiful. And I think that was part of what I really, within that kind of void of not knowing, just leaned into like, okay, what is my direct experience? Like what is, like, without with judging it, and just thinking about what does it even mean to see something, to see beauty, to feel something like with your body, to just really ground into like that direct experience, and just that kind of sense that cognition is like incredibly beautiful. Just the act of perception is incredible. And so that was kind of like, I think, what kind of kick-started like my curiosity and interest in making art, and just exploring like, exploring the world through different mediums, and one of which was, uh, I took a digital arts and media program at Grant McEwen, graduated in 2003, so that ages me a bit. But and I remember my friend handed me just a Super 8 camera, which is a what was like the home movie camera kind of format back in the 60s, 50s, and 60s. And I was just like, I was just drawn to like the idea of working with film, like not video, but like celluloid film, and this kind of like format that was deemed kind of obsolescent almost. And so I was drawn to just picking up this camera, and it was just me and this kind of device that I could use to kind of capture the world, and communicate like what I was seeing with other people. Like, just kind of like, you can be very intentional with the camera and kind of show perspectives that might be hard to explain otherwise. So so for the next, well, I'm still making films, but I've been making films for about 20 years. And really, it was a way of trying to make sense of the world, and myself and my place in it. And I found it like, I was never kind of interested in telling kind of like standard narratives, but using it to more explore like feelings, like emotions, and just kind of unconventional perspectives, just to kind of, again, like make sense of what I was experiencing and thinking about the world in kind of different ways, and being able to share that with people like around the world. Um, so I'll show a quick kind of like 5 minute like little preview of a bunch of films that I made, and I think this spans like over the last like almost 20 years. So there's some pretty old stuff in here, and it'll be about 5 minutes. So.
In my sleep, and I'm turning like a monster with a dead man in his teeth. Let's take time. Let's unwind.
that's a little taste of kind of what I did as far as film work for a couple decades. And I had no intention of becoming a cinematographer, but as I made films, people kind of liked what I did and started asking me to shoot things for them. And that kind of launched this career that spanned the last like 15 years and more, which ended up taking me around the world, like exploring some pretty wild places from like Siberia to yeah, to Jordan to like southern Philippines, um, like to the edges of the world, I guess you could say. And and it was just interesting to kind of think about awareness just through a lens, like how you're just pointing this thing and kind of and sharing perspectives with people, and people are kind of drawn to like a particular way that you view the world. That's kind of the kind of like different camera people just have a different way of kind of pointing the camera. And um, yeah, I enjoyed traveling the world to like many different parts and interacting with different cultures, working with different people. And I think that was like one of the most valuable lessons I could have got at that stage of my life, as far as just being immersed in different cultures and just seeing how different people are in the world and how diverse that is, and the diversity of belief systems, the diversity of just ways of being on the land, and um, yeah, these different realities that are kind of that cover the globe. And it was interesting to just immerse myself in those spaces and just be an observer. And I felt like I spent like 20 years just kind of watching and taking in the world. And yeah, it was a privilege to be able to spend that time with many people. And I think kind of one of the things that you're really paying close attention to the details of your environment in some of these places, and the interaction, like the relationship between the subject and the environment. And it's just it felt like a different kind of mode of awareness to just be like, my job was just to observe this and capture this and to be able to share with other people. And and yeah, I loved it. Kind of got tired of sitting on planes, but like it was, once you're actually there, it's pretty amazing. And the extent that you'll sometimes go to get a shot. I remember we traveled to Siberia and it took like a week to get there for a couple shots. And but yeah, and got stranded there and couldn't even fly home for a week. So, but you just get to wander these places and really get a sense of how complex and diverse the world is. And it really kind of gave me a sense of how different our realities can be and our experiences of the world. And like there's definitely like overlap, but there's also like kind of radically different ways of being in the world that I found like really valuable to witness that and kind of get a sense of of those relationships that people had with like with their environment and with each other in these different places in the world. So, but all the while still kind of questioning like who am I, and like what is my story? Who am I? What am I doing here? Like there's kind of this sense of these existential questions that just keep coming up of like where is this going? Like where does it all end? What is it for? And part of kind of exploring like my own identity and answering some of these questions was like, where do I come from? And what are the experiences that have come before me that have influenced my story, like directly? And one of in kind of that pursuit of trying to have a deeper understanding of like where I came from or come from, I discovered my dad's diary from a time in his life that was a time of transition and his own existential kind of questioning. And he was about 19 years old, and he uh, worked for Environment Canada and was stationed at like one of the most remote places you could be stationed at that time, up in the high Arctic for a year. And like this is a farm kid from southern Ontario, and suddenly you're like might as well be on another planet. And so he spent a year there, and I didn't really know a lot about this story until I read the diary, and I came across this diary entry from 1975, which was I'll read it here for you. This has to be the most boring, lonely, and depressing period of time I've ever lived through. I am not living, just existing. Darkness and isolation make it almost unbearable. Farley Mowat mentions a madness that seeps into the space in the brains of lonely men living up north. How true. I can feel insanity creeping up on me now. And it's no wonder that alcoholism and suicide are so popular up here. Most people turn to one or the other. The latter has been tempting me for some time, and it's very difficult to fight off. In short, winter here could be described as a cold hell. It's like being imprisoned with no way out. No wonder so many people are crazy after living in the Arctic. Right now, I have no ambition to do anything. I sleep in fits and starts, don't give a damn about living. All I can do is wait and hope and pray that I'll survive this torturous ordeal and not be a mental case. And when I read that, it was like a window into something like that just kind of shone a light on like it made me understand my father in a way that I just hadn't before. And like reading the diary before and after, it was like whatever happened there, like he was not the same person. That the person that left was different than the person that came there. And reading this diary entry, I could see that like this was a difficult time for him. Right? And to give you some sense of where it is, you can kind of see at the top there, it says Isaacson. So Isaacson is the weather station he was at, and for a year. And when you're that far north, it's 3 months of 24-hour darkness. So, which, for someone from Southern Ontario, that would be quite a shock to the system. I think a lot of people that live in the north that aren't used to that struggle with that. And it was definitely hard for him. So in 2016, after years of getting money together for a project, I felt like I needed to go to this place to understand and just get a sense of like what he went through there. And I felt I needed that to kind of connect with him on some level. And so in 2016, I took all my grant money that I could get and I bought a plane ticket to get to fly to Isaacson, which involved chartering my own plane for a good portion of that distance, just to get to it because it had been abandoned for about 40 years. So it's 1978 it shut down. So like no one goes there, and it's just this place that's kind of left to slowly fall apart in the Canadian Arctic. So, and I put together an exhibition of images and video that explored his experience and brought his story kind of forward to share with other people, and which at first was very uncomfortable for him, but like I'm thankful that he agreed to it, and um, the story ended up like really resonating with a lot of people just in terms of the impacts of isolation and loneliness. And you don't need to go to Isaacson to experience that. I think even just recently through the pandemic, there's plenty of people experiencing that. So this is it was something that resonated with people. And uh, this is kind of just a video of like what kind of greeted me when I went to Isaacson, which was like very like this is slowed down. So like it's basically like hurricane force winds across this like desert, snow desert, and it just blows and blows, and it just feels like you're on another planet. And when it's blowing like this, the plane's not coming to get you, so you're basically left on your own. I went up there with Inuit guide, so I had someone with a gun because there are polar bears. We didn't run into one, thankfully. But so it was just the two of us there for a week up at this like abandoned station, and I just spent the week photographing it and just sitting in the space and reflecting upon like what he went through at that time. And these are some of the photos that I took during that time. This one's actually up at the Royal Alberta Museum right now for until June as part of an exhibition that's up there right now. And it was just this kind of this ghostly place that's just sitting there while the rest of the world goes on, and it's just the snow comes and goes each year and just blows and blows and blows, and you really get a sense there's ghosts there. Like there's stories. Like I imagine how hard it was for many people that went to places like this, and um even just somebody spray painting one's a lonely number like on this side of this water tank, like it just each bit tells its own story. And it was like an experience to sit in like the room where like my father, before, this is before he met my mother, so we weren't in the picture at this point, but had contemplated suicide, and just thinking about his mental health journey, and then my own, and how this place has also directly influenced me, like through his story. And there was just this kind of this eerie feeling, but also a beauty of the sculptural quality of the snow, that these beautiful things that no one will typically see because people don't go there. And it felt like you can see my guide kind of down there in the corner, like the scale of it, like it's just nothing. Like if you keep going north, you go to Russia. So there's just nothing there. And except this little station just left to rot. So this is kind of a few pictures of the exhibition. And I did like a VR piece so that people could kind of enter, like go to the station and see, like look around and like see the site. And then a friend of mine, David Hoffus, built a little like model of the station, and projected like little figures of us walking through kind of the Isaacson at night. And it was a collaboration with a few other artists, one of which built a giant parka hood that was based on my dad's parka hood that you can kind of see in the bottom there. And so you walk through this kind of into the mind of this my father and his experience there. And it was really like for me, it was an example of like that the narratives that we tell, the stories that we tell, and I think this story had been really something that he felt shameful about, and didn't really like to talk about it because he felt it was like he was weak, like he just couldn't cut it there. And I think it showed that you can change the story, like you can change the perspective on the story. and and for him, I think it turned it to something that was something that he, when he saw how it resonated with people, that it was a source of pride. Like, I endured this and I can made it through. And um like you think of how this experience would have impacted so many people, like that, that level of isolation, and that the story opened up a conversation like that. It's about something that people don't often like to talk about, which is like loneliness, and facing these existential questions of like, what does it even mean to be alive? Like, and especially when you lose that will, like, to engage with life. When, and I think, yeah, it was kind of the beginning of like my artistic practice, really focusing on mental health and changing the narrative, learning to like have the conversation in different ways that are not necessarily direct, like talking about um, just the specifics of what it means to go like be lonely, or like with words, but with different mediums that kind of, I think, are a safer entry point into really difficult conversations for people. So, and yeah, I put that diary entry I read, I put up on the wall as the first thing that you saw as you went through. And I think for him, that was a big moment of being vulnerable and learning to be like, I don't think he had ever been vulnerable like that before. And I think even that act was like a kind of shifted his narrative a bit in terms of his relationship to vulnerability. And yeah, spending a time, I don't know, it was like being on another planet. Like I felt like, as I said, like the plane like dropped us off just landed on the ocean and just said, see you in a week. And like, I don't think the weather was so bad. I don't think they could have come and got us if they wanted to. So you're kind of on your own there. But there's something about being that far out that you feel kind of alive in a different way. Like you're so vulnerable and so at the mercy of like the environment. But there's also this sense of being kind of, that I felt anyways, of being alive, like of being kind of close to what could be like the end. I remember just walking up to the station after the plane dropped off, and it's like I might die. Like that feels like a pretty out there, and even beyond my comfort level, which at that point, like I was pretty comfortable in the Arctic, like that I'd shot a bunch in it, and even in Siberia, I've been like shooting in -50, but this felt like unsupported. It felt like you're on your own. And then that kind of led into a bunch of work that really explored just the patterns that we kind of see in nature and the familiar patterns of like the world that we experience. And I did a series of like macro images that involved like chemical reactions, but like on a macro level. So you'd be looking at something that was like about that far across. And it was just kind of this, I kind of think of it as like making a documentary because I'm not the one telling the story. You're just kind of creating the conditions to have a story tell itself. And it was more just kind of this act of observing like the details and these patterns that emerge from like different things, different interactions, different relationships with different substances, and thinking about all the patterns that emerge from all the interactions that are happening around us at all times, including with like within us and within our brains. So here's a series of images from that show. And I kind of tried to find like these kind of like human-like figures or patterns that like emerged within some of these images. And like this one is an example of just like working with salt and different uh, kind of carbon inks and kind of like these kind of basic kind of building blocks or these basic elements that kind of create these incredible landscapes that kind of made me reflect on just the details, like taking the time to look again, like back to like cognition and direct experience of like what's in front of me. And when you take the time to actually pay attention and look at the details that surround you, there's like a whole world, that dimension that can emerge that I think can be really grounding because like through the project, like I felt like there's an incredible amount of stability to like our world can feel really like unstable at times, like now per se. But there's actually like what's holding all that up and even the human story that's being held up that seems totally crazy at times, but there's actually like an incredible amount of like stability and power like beneath that's actually holding up that reality. And um so these are some images kind of from that series that just were kind of like a just a reflection on that, on like just observing, looking at the details, which I find are just like a reminder of what's actually happening around us at all times and will continue to go on with or without us. But that we get to be part of that and observe that and witness some of these things that are happening. And I think that's really special. And yeah, it was just amazing to see like these are just areas that are again like just that big across at the most. And it's just there's a whole world like beneath us and around us that we don't necessarily even have access to because of the size we are. And we can only witness what we can witness based on like our like just yeah, our biology and the our access to like the senses that we have. But and this series showed in 2018 at the Front Gallery in Edmonton. So, and then even through all that, there's still this kind of like sense of like, okay, um, yeah, it's all amazing, but who am I in that? And I always coming kind of back to that question of like, what is the nature of my story? Like, what is the essence of me, if there is an essence? What is this like? What's the point of this story? And Um, this is where I kind of got interested in meditation and like mindfulness to kind of build as a way of like just building awareness and paying more attention to myself and to my environment. Um, and in 2019, I decided I'd come off of like a really busy schedule of filming and kind of wanted to set some time aside to take in a 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat in southern Alberta. And so at these retreats, you meditate for 11 hours a day, don't talk to anyone, don't make eye contact with anyone. And you just kind of, you get a lot of time to really sit with yourself and get to know yourself. And through that practice of meditation, you really kind of expand your awareness into your body. And I feel like for a lot of my life, like my focus, my awareness had kind of been out there in the world, kind of looking less about like what was going on here. And when I began to like take in what was happening within my body, um, what happened was like I brought awareness to parts of me that I think I'd closed off for a long time and suppressed. And part of that was going back to like this apocalyptic narrative, like the narrative of my childhood, that fear, this fear that had gone away, like I hadn't felt it in a long time. But this fear of like there's people kind of say like everything leads eventually leads to the fear of death, that being like the fundament, this like kind of base level fear that we have. And I would argue that like eternal damnation is like one step below that. Like the thought of like being damned forever to a place of pain and suffering is like I can't think of anything worse than that. And yeah, as I was sitting in that meditation, like there was this like you're really bringing awareness to parts of you that maybe you weren't ready to really open that door and deal with what's coming like on the other side of it, and hadn't really anticipated that happening. And when that happened, it was like it felt like I opened up the awareness into my whole body and what was on the other side of all those doors that had been closed, because our brains can be good at dealing with trauma from the past too, and like suppressing things just in an effort to even manage and get through life and be able to function. And but by bringing awareness to that, it was like it was an overwhelming amount of like I can't explain like fear on that level. Like it just overwhelmed my nervous system. Like it was, and it shattered my sense of self. Like I felt like the person I thought I was just falling to pieces in that. And it was like a super confusing time. Like it really felt like as that fear and that narrative kind of like came back, like it felt like that narrative was kind of projecting into the world like that I was experiencing. And it was just, it felt very volatile. And um, I ended up leaving that retreat. I made it through the whole retreat, but when I got home was just like expressed to my partner, like this is what's going through my head, and it doesn't, I don't feel well. Like, and um, yeah, she took me to the hospital and I spent the night in the psych ward there, just kind of trying to grapple and wrap my head around what I was experiencing. And it really felt like on a much more like emotional and charged level, like kind of falling back in, like similar to what I'd experienced in my adolescence, of kind of this like existential vacuum, but like on a whole other level. Like it just felt like my sense of self was falling, like all the armor that I had to kind of shield myself from kind of facing my fears of like being a vulnerable human in the world just fell away. And it was just this sense of um collapsing like into nothingness. And I think that's probably the best way I can describe it. And I remember just thinking I was dying, and it felt kind of this process of just falling to pieces and facing death. And I ended up just kind of falling into this like black hole. And I remember just kind of at the end of it, just kind of being like, well, I guess that's it, and kind of surrendered to it. And but it was a nightmare to go through. And I woke up the next day, like it was like I think I slept for a day, and woke up and was just, it felt like waking up out of a nightmare or a bad dream. It was just like what just happened? And and it felt different. Like the whole world kind of felt different. Like it felt like falling into like emptiness. Like the whole world I didn't feel like there was this center in me like I had experienced previously, like this familiar sense of just even being in my body. Everything felt like very like quiet almost and just empty. And And at first that emptiness was like really hard to sit with. But as I think at that point I was just happy to be like alive still, because I thought it was like I was facing the end, and um staring kind of into this new space, it was just like uncomfortable. There was like definitely some anxiety sitting with that, just of like what happened. And as I kind of talked to people about like what I had experienced, and kind of gained some language to think of the experience in a way that felt like it was something that potentially provided the opportunity for growth and healing, as hard as it was to go through. As I kind of just sat with it and just stayed with, again, kind of anchoring back into direct experiencing, like really anchoring into my body, and just being in the world and what it meant to sense it and really feel it. And slowly, like this kind of like color, like this dimension kind of came back to it. And I just kept sitting with it and kept meditating through that period, just to be with the discomfort, and sit kind of facing that void, I guess you could say, and that emptiness that kind of felt like it had surrounded me for a while. And as I kept doing it, like it just the world started to the vibrance of the world began to come back, and the sense of like I don't feel the same way anymore, but I feel like I'm okay as I am. And just sat with that experience, and that was 5 years ago. And I think reading about other people's experiences with that, like similar kind of experiences, some people referring to it as like a spiritual emergency, or there's like different language around it, but just thinking of like some of these things we face that can overwhelm us, but can also be potentially provide an opportunity to learn and grow from, and kind of renew our sense of self through. And for me, it felt like ultimately like a renewal process, but really kind of changed what I cared about in the world, and what I even felt like doing with my life from there on in. And so my artistic practice kind of changed a bit. And one of the later projects I did the year, like about 2 years after that, was this project called Sit Still, Take Notice, where I sat for 8 hours a day in a gallery for 30 days, meditating with like 6 3D printers, and all printing these little like Buddha heads that I would slowly just like, as the printers finished, I would just pile up this these heads, like, and it seemed kind of like this kind of pointless act, but really kind of like wanted to create a space for people to just sit and reflect on what it means to actually just be, and in that moment. And each 3D printer sat on a speaker that had Nikola Tesla had this theory that like there were these 6 tones that you could have in an arrangement that would um, he thought that like if you had them in this arrangement and sat within kind of these tones surrounding you, that it would open up your third eye. And I just thought it was interesting. I don't know, I found Nikola Tesla to be kind of wild, and didn't know if there's anything to it, but I thought it would be interesting to kind of create that scenario, and just reflect on yeah, what it means to be human, and create a space to just sit with people. So people would come and just sit with me throughout the 30 days. Some would come and sit for a minute, some would sit for 2 hours. Some people didn't sit at all and just walked in and thought it was really weird and walked out. And yeah, I did that for 30 days. And from my experience, just sitting for that long, it was again just my kind of intention going into that was to just really anchor into my body, like getting out of like the narrative, like the stories that are going through my head, and just being in the space, and just being with the people that would come to sit with me, and kind of hold space for that. So if anybody wants a couple dozen Buddha heads, I still have a few bags full of them. So And just using the Buddha head as kind of this reference to I don't know, I have a lot of respect for Buddhism and kind of the basic, the core principles of just like knowing thyself, like knowing the nature of the mind. And then I did another project a few years later, which is called Where Are You? And this was a virtual reality project where I went on social media for kind of broke it apart into a few weeks. And I so I meditated for a week, and then I did an fMRI brain scan at the University of Alberta, and then went on TikTok and a bunch of social media for a week. I'd never been on TikTok, and I went on it for like 8 hours a day and other social media, and just totally like immersed myself in this world of social media, which I am not entirely familiar with. Like I was on one platform at the time, Instagram or something, but just went like deep into some of these platforms, TikTok being one of the main ones. And here's kind of an example of what people would see in the VR. So there's like three different scans. There's like my brain after meditating for a week. There's a scan of my brain after being on TikTok and other social media for a week, and then one just like kind of a comparison without doing either. And it wasn't like, I wouldn't say this is a scientific study at all. There's just me and my brain, but it was just kind of opening up a conversation of like, where are we when we interact with these digital environments? Like, how is this impacting our brain and our sense of self in the world, even spatially? Like if you next time you're on your phone, just think about where you are in space when that you kind of get sucked in. And um, so this is kind of a video of like what it kind of looked like in the VR environment, and then kind of built up images of like my skull and face out of like the fMRI scans. And then you can see like kind of that spinning thing off to the side. It's like scans of like my white track, uh, white tracks in the brain, and then kind of projected social media video into those scans. And you'll see, and at the end, in the center is just is me on a scan of me on my cell phone. So that's the white track that you're seeing a close up of right now. And then TikTok kind of like wrapping around that part of my brain. Yeah, and you can see me in the center there on my cell phone. And here's a couple stills from it. And it was just more of an invitation to think like, how are these environments, like we're a reflection of our environment, and these digital environments are no different. So kind of just questioning like, how are they changing us? Because they are. And here's kind of an example of some of the TikTok kind of this is just one of the kind of the face, this kind of stuff I was interacting with, just putting filters on my face for way too much time. I just kind of got drawn into this world that's really like kind of seductive. It's like this kind of mirror that kind of we can look into that has all these filters that kind of change our perception of ourselves. And TikTok was just wild. It was my first time on it, and it was just the most bizarre experience. And I felt at the end of a week, I actually thought I had damaged my brain a bit. I felt totally scattered for a few weeks after that. Just because it's this like switch, 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 and it's just totally unrelated. And I just found it was really hard on my brain. And it felt like my attention was kind of in a pinball machine after that. And it was just, yeah, yeah, one of the most kind of bizarre experiences I've ever had. So here's just kind of a photo of like I set up in the gallery. There's the VR piece, and then there was like all these little 3D prints of me on my cell phone that are just kind of lining up towards this like white void kind of in the corner of the gallery. And I ended up leaving a lot of these little figurines around the city, just like random places for people to find. Just again, just like points of reflection to really think about like ourselves. And sometimes you just need a little thing that just is weird enough that it's not making you feel defensive, but more curious. And then I think curiosity is like, I think our saving grace as a species is just to be curious about our world rather than Because in curiosity, there's like a desire to understand. And then one of my more recent projects, which I think Nicole is somewhat familiar with, was um, kind of me dipping my toe into performance art. There's a sign in St. Albert that anyone who's from St. Albert knows well, but it's for anyways, it's for like cosmetic procedures. It's been there for years for a local company, and it wasn't really about like I don't have issues with people like if they want if that's something they want to do, that's fine. But it's really about the messaging that was on the billboards. And there was one kind of in the bottom corner you could see there, and this was the kind of started it was at Christmas time, and it said confidence and empowerment, the gift for every woman. And I just like I couldn't not do anything after seeing that because it was just like what kind of message are we telling people? Especially I think of like I have two daughters, and it's like what is like I don't want them to see stuff like this in the world. Like this is not I don't know. I didn't feel it was okay. So I dressed up as Santa that first year and just made a little homemade sign that said "You look fine," and I just stood out in front of the billboard for hours. And yeah, I think people really appreciated it. There was a lot of honks, but and just kind of trying to again like change the narrative. It's like it's not about like I guess the direct way to deal with that could have been to um just get really mad and like say to the company like you guys like I I don't know just to get mad at people, but I think then the reaction is to be defensive about what you're doing. So through something absurd like this, it's a way, an invitation to change the narrative a bit, but not in a way that's threatening or it's more of like people get curious when they see somebody in a bunny suit or a Santa suit on the side of the road with a sign like this. So, and then that leads to them thinking like, rather than kind of immediately reacting from an emotional kind of a place that's not anchored so much in rational or thought or curiosity. And so just kind of opening up the conversation of like what are we putting out in the world and what message is that sending and what is that doing to people's mental health when they feel like they aren't good enough as they are. And you know capitalism's built like quite a empire on our insecurities about ourselves, so just challenging that and just trying to keep that conversation open. um and as I come to a close there, I see we're at 8, and I'll go back to kind of this little figure. I know it's kind of weird with the brain, but I like the idea of the open mind. and and really through all that was this sense like of using like the act of creativity or the act of creation and as like a means of not looking for answers but just to explore what it means to be, and that's enough. Like and I think I've found a lot of um feel very grounded in that of just exploring what it means to be and where do I want to go from here and what story do I want to create, because we are the creators of our stories, and we co-create the narratives we experience in relationship with each other. And these are stories. Once again, I'll kind of go back to this quote, like the ultimate hidden truth of the world is that it's something that we make and could just as easily make differently. So it's like, how do we each as an individual, as individuals, like how willing are we to change our stories in an effort to change the collective narrative? And um, yeah, so I think that's kind of just more, that's my prompt. That's my invitation to kind of through sharing this is to to be curious, and even when it involves sometimes facing something that's potentially threatening or scary, because being human can be really hard at times. And but when we get curious with some of that, it's interesting what we can kind of reveals itself and what we can become aware of that maybe shifts that narrative, and not to something that's necessarily rooted in fear in the same way, but can passing through kind of just being curious about that thing that we don't want to look at, or that part of ourselves that we're kind of suppressing or not wanting to face, or even the existential fears that we all deal with. Like kind of leaning towards some of that discomfort sometimes, but with curiosity can really, I found in my experience, like lead to just like a renewed sense of being in the world. And not that it isn't still hard, but it's just I really believe in the act of like creation. Like we are creators. And so I don't know, I invite us all to like make a better world together.